Good evening. Very pleased to welcome Mr. Jean-Jacques Barbéris from Amundi's management. Thank you very much for being with us, one of the top economists in France and Europe. We talked about regulations in Europe, how it is helping big time, and we talked here about the unified ESG laws. You go around the world as a global head. How can we basically have an interconnection between the different markets and how to apply them throughout the different markets in asset management?
Thank you very much. But I think you're asking a very good question, because at the moment what we see is that a number of countries, or I would say continents, are providing new ESG regulations, but so far they are not totally mirroring themselves. So I think all the efforts that can be done, I would say, to align on common principles by definition could be beneficial. For instance, a lot of work has been done at the European level by the European Commission to partner with other countries, for instance, to define what is an equivalent taxonomy approach. So I believe this is very strongly going forward. There is all the work that is being done as well on reporting standards at international level that I believe progressively is going as well to help. And there is also the work that the asset management community can do together, I would say, to align on the same type of principles of management, for example, when it comes to managing portfolio with net zero objectives.
Yeah, we noticed that despite top-level ESG reporting, however, we face some challenges in Switzerland with some banks and also in the United States. How can we get more aligned ESG, more factual amid all the greenwashing in Europe and all over the world, not only in Europe and the United States, and also green hashing, as you know?
But I think first, to come back on the, I would say, individual cases you mentioned, no one can expect that ESG per se would be some kind of a new crystal ball that has the capacity to predict everything. This being said, one could advocate that notably the ESG analysis, for instance, when it comes to governance, could give, I would say, some highlights on some specific cases. What I think for me that is very important at the moment is that the ESG subject has matured a lot. So that is subject to criticism on both sides, but in a way it shows that it has come to a point of maturity where at the moment where we are less maybe than in the past at focusing on just concepts and principles, but on the ground, I would say, implications and integrations, and which for me is a key element. The key element for ESG going forward is the integrity of what we are doing as a financial industry, and I'm pretty sure that this is the area of focus at the moment.
Dr. Sultan Jaber of UAE basically called for including everyone, total inclusion of all parties within COP, including oil and gas, including asset management. How do you foresee that at the business level?
But I think the UNFCCC, so the treaty under which this convention, the COP, is going to be gathered, it's important to remember that this is a universal treaty that tries to build up collective actions of all the countries and all the different businesses. So the fact that we have, and we keep, since the Paris Agreement in particular that was sealed in France, I would say a universal approach, is, for me, the only way to address the climate challenge that is collective by nature.
How do you foresee the impact of COP28 being the first COP having assessment versus in terms of results?
But I think anything that can go more into the, I would say, assessment of the progress that we are making collectively on that is by definition an important step forward. We know that at the moment we are, I would say, not at the time anymore of the announcement of the objectives. We are at the moment of the implementation and the execution. So the measurement is a key element, and we need to measure the progress that has been done and the progress that will still need to be done.
How, from the financial sector in the Middle East versus the global, how do you foresee the global, the regional financial sector implementing ESG on the ground factually in the Middle East versus the rest of the world? And what can we learn from each other in this regard? What can you bring in terms of global practices to the Middle East in particular? But
I think what I've seen in all the conversations that I had in the region during this week, in particular, first, all the conversations I had, I would say, an important I would say, part on sustainability on the agenda, so that's very factual. Second, I've seen a lot, I would say, of ambitions regarding the contributive aspect to the transition, how to contribute to the solutions to the transition. I think it's important. This is something that is very perceivable, and I think the region can look as well at what's happening, for instance, at European level to channel more and more investments. Ultimately, I strongly believe that on these matters, we need to have regulations in place because they are needed for collective action. So we will see what will be the evolutions in this region of the world. But I believe that the COP will also be probably a strong impetus in that direction going forward.
Yeah. In terms of data, some in the Middle East say that there is an influx of data in terms of ESG in the Middle East. Some of them say, no, there's a lack of data. How can we... but the influx is causing some distortion among the ESG reporters, among the ESG even, practitioners in the Middle East. How can we address that?
I would say first, I think there is no black and white answer to that because I think first, when you look at the data, there are, I would say, issues that are encompassed under the ESG concept on which you do have at the moment very reliable data, and I think much more reliable than in the past. There are some where we are still missing some data. I think to come back to your question on the distortion that can be done by, I would say, ESG assessment, for me what is key is to, what are we talking about? What are the material elements that we are focusing on? I believe that, for instance, with climate-related data, we have come to a level of maturity where we have a good access to data. We have good data that can help us to build up portfolios, taking that element as a core objective.
Yeah. Here in the Middle East, many believe that the government is at the forefront of the ESG race, whereby the private sector is behind. How can we include and how can we encourage and entice the financial sector, especially asset management, into, getting at speed?
But if I may, I think it's always for the government to be the first on these questions. We are talking about, I would say, very political questions as well.
Indeed.
And collective commitments. Right. And so therefore, I think it's very important that public authorities are taking the leadership and their responsibilities and do not pass it to the private sector. Yeah. At the end of the day, we may be very smart people or not, but we have not the legitimacy to decide on collective, I would say, type of action that belongs to the legitimate authorities. So the fact that, I would say, the governments are the front runners, I think, is the best. Then afterwards, it paves the way. I'm a strong believer, and this is something that I've observed within the French financial community before the Paris Agreement, in particular that the COP is a very good moment of creating collective impetus, and I think it's a lot, I would say, in collective discussions with the different players that you create that motivation. But the fact that the governments are front-running the question, for me, is a very good thing.
All right. What are the top three expectations from COP28, you as a financial services person?
I would say, for me, if I would have one, which is that there is a lot of focus on the execution of the commitments that have been taken and how we pave the way to execute more of them, I would say, more efficiently and more quickly. So I think, again, I believe we have objectives, collective ones. We have objectives within the financial sectors. A number of institutions have taken some. Now the question is, on the ground, what is the execution, what they are delivering? So it might seem a little low expectation, but to execute what has been committed to, for me, is the key element, because the time to act is now. We all know it collectively.
Mr. Barbéris, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you.